And we're going to continue with the ninth chapter of The House with the Clock in Its Walls by John Bellairs. Lewis tried to get Tarby back as a friend, didn't quite work out. He was pretty sad, and so he decided to go into the house across the street with one of his uncle's magic staffs and see what he could see. So far, he's walking around, has not encountered anybody. He looked in the kitchen. A couple of little plaster plaques on the walls, and an electric clock, a red formica counter, and a tubular steel chair, also upholstered in cherry red. In the corner there was an icebox. He opened it and found one bottle of Coke. Or was it Coke? He turned the bottle over in his hands. It was gritty on the outside, covered with dirt, like it had been buried, and the liquid inside it was lighter than Coke. Sort of a brownish red. Lewis put the bottle back. He shut the icebox door. The house seemed to be filled with a humming noise, and he knew that it was his blood in his ears. Gripping the magic cane with a trembling, sweaty hand, he went to inspect the other rooms. He checked out the whole first floor, but he found nothing. Nothing but more half-furnished rooms. A chair here, a table there, what lamps there were unplugged, but a bare ceiling fixture burned in each room. Now Lewis was at the bottom of a brightly lit staircase. He paused for a moment, and then, suddenly, he pounded the cane on the floor and shouted, "I have come to defeat you, Mrs. Izzard! Show yourself! Are you afraid of me? You ought to be. I know who you are and what you want to do. I challenge you to a duel by the ancient rules of magic." Lewis had expected his challenge to sound grand and majestic, to ring high and clear like a blast on a silver trumpet. Instead it fell flat. It died away in the heavy stillness of the house. Lewis felt foolish. His cheeks burned, and he began to get worried. Lewis did not know a blessed thing about the ancient rules of magic. He had come over here with Jonathan's magic stick in his hand, hoping that the stick would do his work for him. Now he was doubtful. What if the cane wouldn't work for anyone but its master? What if Mrs. Izzard's magic was stronger than Jonathan's? Lewis looked at the burning globe, and he looked up the staircase. He felt like turning around and running home as fast as he could. But then how would he save Mrs. Zimmerman and Jonathan and the world and make up for what he had done? The house was very silent. Lewis took a deep breath and started to climb the staircase. Halfway up the stairs, on the broad landing, Lewis stopped to look at a picture. It was the only picture he had seen in the house. There, in the heavy oval black frame, was a photo of an unpleasant-looking old man. He was sitting or standing, you couldn't tell which, against a wall covered with intricately patterned wallpaper. Lewis looked at the picture for a long time. He took in all the details, the 2 or 3 strands of hair combed over the almost bald head, the deep-set eyes that seemed to be staring right at him, the hawkish nose. He looked at the man's clothing. He was wearing an old-fashioned stiff cardboard collar with folded black points, and his left hand rested on the ball of what must be a cane. There appeared to be some writing on the cane, but Lewis couldn't read it. Lewis stood there wondering who the old man was. Could it be? He snatched the picture down and looked at the back. No label. Quickly he turned it over and stared at the picture again. Something was familiar, of course. The wallpaper. It was the wallpaper in the upstairs front hallway. Roman numeral 2s hooked together with curlicues. Lewis knew now that he was staring at a picture of Isaac Izzard. Then it was all true. This woman was his wife, come back from the grave to do what? Lewis felt his heart pounding. He was more scared than he had ever been in his life. He didn't want to fight Mrs. Izzard anymore. He just wanted to get out. He looked frantically up the stairs toward the dark hallway. He looked frantically up the stairs toward the dark doorway of the bedroom. No one was coming. He started down the stairs, but Mrs. Izzard was in the way. She stood there smiling. In her hand was an ivory-handled cane. "Well, young man, what is it? What makes you think you can roam around other people's houses at night? What do you want?" Lewis was afraid he might faint, but he didn't. Instead, he felt himself stiffen. He raised the cane. "I don't know what you want to do to us, Mrs. Izzard," he said, "but you're not going to do it. My uncle's magic is stronger than yours." She laughed, a harsh, nasty laugh. "Do you mean that toy cane? He probably got it at the Cabernum County Fair. Don't be foolish, child." As though all through the house, the cane had burned with a steady gray light. Now, as Mrs. Izzard spoke, the globe began to go dark. Louis looked down and saw that he was staring at something that looked very much like a burnt-out light bulb. "And now," said Mrs. Izzard, stepping forward, "and now, my fine young friend, you will see what it is to bother nice old ladies who just want to be left alone." She snatched the cane from his numb hand and threw it clattering down the stairs. Now she was bending over him, and the light reflected from her spectacles hurt his eyes. Her voice was angry now, and she talked faster. "Do you have any idea what it is like to be buried deep in the earth? Dark stone all around, no one to hear you or see you, your only company a dead man. Do you?" "Stop right there, Mrs. Izzard. You're not dealing with children now." There at the bottom of the stairs stood Mrs. Zimmerman. Her face was lit by invisible footlights, and she wore a floor-length purple cape. In the folds, instead of shadows, were deep wells of orange fire. In one hand she held a tall black pole with a clear glass globe on top. Inside the globe a magenta star burned. It grew in brightness when she spoke, and dwindled when she was silent. Mrs. Izzard turned around. She faced Mrs. Zimmerman calmly. "So it's you," she said. "Well, my power has not reached its height, but I am strong enough to deal with you. Arite ye!" She pointed the ivory cane at Mrs. Zimmerman. Nothing happened. She stopped smiling and dropped her cane. Now it was Mrs. Zimmerman's turn. She pounded the butt of her staff on the floor, and the staircase was lit with a flash of ultraviolet lightning. With an awful scraping cry that no human ever made, Mrs. Izzard rushed past Louis and up the stairs. Mrs. Zimmerman stared after her. "Run back home, Louis!" she shouted as she dashed past him. "You're a brave boy, but you're no match for that thing. Run, I tell you!" Louis bounded down the stairs, taking them two at a time. He was terrified, but he was happy, too. As he ran down the front steps of the house, he heard strange exploding sounds and sharp cries. Branches grabbed at him as he ran along the well-swept brick walk. One of them actually wrapped itself around his left leg and started to pull. With a scream and a frantic thrashing motion, Louis tore loose and plunged across the street. He threw open the gate and ran, whoomp, into something hard and yet soft. Jonathan. Louis broke down. He began to weep hysterically with his face pressed into Jonathan's blue work shirt. Jonathan wrapped his arms around Louis and held him tight. Though Louis could not see it, Jonathan was staring over his head at the Hatchett house, and there was a grim smile on his face. A purple flash lit up one of the upstairs windows. Now a cold blue-white pinpoint was kindled in the adjoining window, as if someone had just lit a strange kind of match. The blue light spread till it filled the window. It spread on the other window and ate up the fading purple light. Now there was a dull, powerful explosion like an aerial bomb at a fireworks display. It hurt Jonathan's ears as he watched. Both upstairs windows turned a brilliant purple. The chimney of the house toppled and its bricks slid down the roof. The overgrown hedge thrashed and swayed as if it had been caught in a hurricane. Several diamond-shaped pieces of glass fell out of their frames and tinkled on the walk below. Then the house was silent and dark. Louis stopped crying, and now he turned around to look. A full minute passed. Then the front door scraped open, and Mrs. Zimmerman appeared. She walked calmly down the steps and down the brick walk and out into the street, humming as she went. The orange fires in the creases of her robe had gone out, and so had the magic footlights. In one hand she held an old umbrella. The handle of the umbrella was a crystal knob, and a tiny seed of violet fire still burned in it. In her other hand, Mrs. Zimmerman held Jonathan's cane. Its globe was still dark. "Hi, Florence," said Jonathan, as if he were meeting her in the street on a Sunday afternoon. "How did it go?" "Well enough," she said, handing him his cane. "Here's your magic wand. It's had quite a shock, but I think it'll recover. As for Mrs. Izzard, I just don't know. I may have destroyed her, or I may have just put her out of action for a while. In any case, let's take the time that has been given us and find that clock." And that is the end of Chapter 9.